Greetings everyone and welcome to our Global Leading Voices webinar campaign. On behalf of PECB, I would like to thank you all for joining us on this exclusive webinar where we are going to discuss about 6 steps to secure your organization from cybersecurity threats. My name is Kushtrim Cernobregu, Marketing Manager for IT Security at PECB, and today I'm going to be the organizer of this webinar. The main points that we will cover in today's webinar are: what are the weakest links in the security infrastructure of an organization? Is there a perfect prevention of cybersecurity threats in an organization? And how to adopt the right security controls. Today's webinar presenter is John Chrisley, Global Chief Information Security Officer for Netsurient and EventTrackle, Best CM 2017 Cybersecurity Excellence Awards, where he brings many years of experience in technical and cybersecurity-related operational, project, and program management. John is an accomplished author and blogger, and is often a keynote and panel speaker at international, national, and regional events. In addition, at the end of the presentation, we will have a question and answer session, and we would love to hear from you. Therefore, I highly encourage you to submit any question or comments you may have during this webinar in the chat box of your control panel. John will answer all the questions accordingly at the end of the presentation. Thank you for your attention, and I hope you will get insightful information from this webinar. Please, Mr. Chrisley, you may begin with the presentation.
Okay, great. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. Again, my name is John Chrisley. I'm happy to be here, and I hope that this webinar will be informational and educational. Again, as Kushtrim said, if there's any questions during the webinar, please type them into the chat box, and we will do our best to answer all the questions on this webinar. If there are questions that we cannot answer on the webinar, I'll be responding to them after the webinar as best as possible. So to begin, I just want to give a little more information about myself. Kushtrim did a great job introducing me, so I won't go through every word on this initial slide. I am a cybersecurity evangelist, which means that I try my best to evangelize best practices when it comes to cybersecurity. I'm in the business of protecting people and data and companies and company reputations. So I do a fair amount of security blogging and threat researching. I've got a great team within the 2 firms for which I serve as their CISO, and I learn from them as much as I hope they learn from me. I do a lot of speaking and writing on the topic of cybersecurity, and I believe that there is so much yet to be done in the world of cybersecurity that we've only really just begun. And so hopefully today's webinar will give you some insight into what I think still needs to be done and a few tips. We talked about 6 tips. Hopefully you'll get a few more out of this webinar. There's simply not enough time to go through every possible thing that could be done, but hopefully you'll get an idea of what I feel are some of the top items that can be done. I have taught in front of groups such as ISACA, which is the audit group, the ACFE, which is the fraud examiner group, and ISSA. Everything from computer forensics, which is a big part of my background, to auditing IT systems for fraud. I currently work in a very heavily regulated type of area, mostly to support our customers with their regulation requirements. And I will tell you right off the bat that whether you're talking PCI or HIPAA or GLBA or any other kind of regulation or standard, I believe that there's only one way to really do security, and that's the right way. I believe that if you take the time and the effort to secure your systems and your people, the regulations will not be as difficult to abide by or to comply with. Just real quick, I had a company before I joined this company, OMC Systems. I did a lot of cybersecurity advisory, and I continue to do so. As far as certifications, I cannot stress enough about how important education and certification is in the industry of cybersecurity. You'll hear at the end of this webinar some available certifications from PECB, which are very important and very useful. So please be on the lookout for that at the end of the webinar. Myself, I've gone through many more certifications that are what are here on the list, but these are some of the ones that I'm more proud of and allow me to stay on top of what's going on in the industry as far as best practices and regulations. This slide, and I apologize if the text is a little small to anyone, but I wanted to talk a little bit about what the two companies that I am involved with currently do. Neturian is a managed security service provider. We handle managed firewall and PCI compliance solutions for anybody that has multi-locations such as retail and healthcare and law firms and so on and so forth. We handle their firewalls, we handle their wireless networks, and the effort that we put into this is to prevent those locations from experiencing breaches. And we'll talk a little bit during the webinar about how that's almost an impossible task and we can never guarantee that there won't be a breach, but we try to make sure that we take all the steps that we possibly can as a service provider to protect our customers and their data. We have since recently acquired a company named Event Tracker who produces a SIM solution, Security Information Event Management, endpoint solution, which is also file integrity monitoring. And so they too protect down at the edge device. So you want to think your PC or your server. And so between Neturian and Event Tracker, we have everything from the firewall to the endpoint that we provide layers of protection for. Everything from vulnerability scanning and intrusion detection, behavioral analytics, HoneyNet, other defense in-depth capabilities that are not only available to our customers, but they are managed, which is a big difference of what we provide over others. Is we have a 24/7 managed offering from our Global Security Operations Center. So again, at the very bottom you can see we serve retail, hospitality, healthcare, legal, banking. The list goes on and on. There's really no vertical or specialty that does not need cybersecurity. If you're in business today and you're in any way connected to the internet, you need cybersecurity protections. So let's get right into it and talk a little bit about what the issues are and what can be done. So unfortunately, humans continue to be the weakest link in this chain. It's unfortunate that that's the case, but you have to remember that computers are just computers and they are run by humans. They're also secured by humans, and they also can be breached by humans, inadvertently and on purpose. So according to the latest version of the Verizon Data Breach report, that phishing is currently topping the list about how humans are being exploited. So for those of you that are not aware of what phishing is, that is when you get one of those emails in your inbox and you happen to click on a link or you open a document that you should not have. It could have been a PDF document, it could have been a Word document. Maybe they're trying to redirect you to an online payment gateway or your bank or a charity site to give money. And what will happen is that if you fall for these scams, your computer can be infected, or you can actually possibly give your sensitive information like your credit card data or sometimes your social security number, and they can conduct identity theft or take over your computer to further get into the corporate network and not only steal your data but all the data that's attached to your corporate network. You can see here that the statistics show that 63% of data breaches that have been confirmed, they involve leveraging weak or default or stolen passwords. Passwords are really still the worst offender when it comes to how are we so insecure as a industry or as a profession of cybersecurity. How are we still so insecure? Passwords, unfortunately, still are the weakest link. I've done many password audits in my years, which now are total 27 years being in the IT industry. I've done many password audits, and I can tell you that passwords are sometimes very silly and foolish because of convenience. People want to be able to remember them. And hard passwords, strong passwords, can be very difficult to remember. So people will make up very easy passwords. They'll contain their name, their siblings' names, their spouses' names, maybe the address of where they work. And these are not very difficult to compromise and guess. It's also possible nowadays to use social media such as LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, for a hacker to take all the information that you post on a social site and use that to try to figure out what your corporate password might be. Again, I want to remind everyone, hackers have lots of time to do this. While the rest of us are very busy with our work every day, the hackers get to sit there all day and try to guess passwords of the users or the corporations that they want to break into. So again, unfortunately, humans are still the weakest link. We could talk about all the technology in the world, but it really starts with the passwords. And you've got to make sure that your organization's passwords and your own password are as strong as possible. So a best practice to go along with this is what I like to refer to as secure the human. Okay, secure that person. If the passwords are the first and last defense for your company or your own data, even at home with your own home computer, you want to make sure that you secure the human. How do you do that? Well, at a company environment, you want to make sure that your employees are provided with cybersecurity awareness training. If you happen to be an employee of a company that has not provided you any cybersecurity awareness training, ask somebody in charge if they could. If they have anything available, or if somebody could take some time and spend even 30 minutes to sit down and talk with you and your group about cybersecurity awareness training, sort of the do's and don'ts, and that would obviously include passwords in there. You also want to understand what to do and not to do with things like USB sticks that are brought in from home, external hard drives, how to use cloud-based storage for company data as opposed to personal data. These are all the sort of things that can be covered very quickly in an awareness session. But you want to make sure that you understand and also understand what your company rules are. What do they allow you to do and what would they prefer you not do, and what's going to get you in trouble and possibly have you lose your employment if you violate the company rules. The other thing that's very important to secure the human is you need to control the access to critical systems and information. And what I mean by this is it's much harder for small companies sometimes to do this if they don't have dedicated IT people or dedicated cybersecurity professionals on board or even advising them. What I mean by this is you want to make sure that your data, whatever data you happen to be in possession of on behalf of your company and your customers or the business partners that you deal with, you want to make sure that data is secure. Everything from getting into your building or your office to how you store your data. Is it properly locked down on a file server or in a SharePoint with proper permissions or in a cloud storage facility? To how do you dispose of the data when it's no longer in use? Again, in my experience, having done many cybersecurity audits for firms over the years, one of the things I always find is a treasure trove of data existing on the network that nobody has usually touched in years. Nobody knows why they need it, why it's there, and sometimes it's not secured very well. And so if you don't dispose of your data after its useful life, or you're just keeping it because you have no idea what to do with it, then you could expose yourself and your company to a breach of that data if it were somehow compromised and exposed. Again, these are just very simple examples to how to secure the human and to make sure that your employees and yourself and your executive team understand what could be an exploit to your company, what could compromise the security of your company and cause you harm, and we'll talk about what some of that harm could be in a future slide. All right, I want to be clear, absolute security is impossible. I have also advised boards in my career, and I'll usually get the question, how do we make sure that we never get hacked? You know, most companies do not want to suffer a breach. They do not want to have their company in the newspaper or the media outlets or on social media being discussed about a breach. So it's a very valid request for somebody to make of a cybersecurity professional to say, how can you make sure that we never get breached? But I'm going to be honest, that's virtually impossible. I know of no real ways to make sure that you are never going to be breached except to turn off your computers and unplug them and go home. And obviously that's not a possibility. You have to conduct business. So although absolute security, in my opinion, is impossible, I think there's a lot of things that can be done to make sure that you are as secure as possible. A couple of concepts here on the slide. One, the threatscape, the threat landscape is constantly evolving. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is that hackers and hacker attempts are getting more skilled and impressive and scary every day. We're always learning and researching what are the ways that people are using to hack into companies and steal data. It used to be back in the days of lesser cyber controls that people would call up on the phone and get people to give their passwords away and break into companies that way, or walk into a company dressed as a repair technician. We heard a lot about that. Now, while that still goes on in today's world, now it's almost easier at times for hackers to break into an organization, depending on the level of security in place at the firm. So one of the things that has to go on is somebody has got to keep their finger on the pulse of what's going on in the threat landscape and in the world to make sure that your security controls are constantly evolving and changing to keep up with that. Now, it can be very difficult to do this on your own. This is why there are companies like NetSharing and Event Tracker that offer a lot of these services to their clients. We are definitely trying to keep our finger on the pulse of what's going on a global basis when it comes to cyber threats, and then turning that around and figuring out how can we improve the security posture of an organization through firewall controls and endpoint protections and just plain old monitoring and paying attention to what's going on with the movement of data and user activity. In the second column here on the slide, you'll see breach scenarios differ between industry and asset landscape. As we examine breaches that have occurred and that have been publicized, we obviously see that hacking takes different forms. Breaches are experienced from different types of methods of hackers getting in. So there's almost no two breaches that are the same. I have experienced, unfortunately, some breaches during my career. I've also then been brought in to investigate breaches after they have occurred for other firms. And they're always different. There's always a story, and it usually comes down to not having the proper security controls in place and keeping a handle on what's going on with data and the movement. The third column is very important. In my career as a CISO sitting inside organizations, not my current employers as a vendor, but when I actually served healthcare and education and insurance industries, even county government, I saw with my own two eyes that the spend on security controls and people and training does not always correlate to the effectiveness. This actually has two parts to it. One, security people will always tell you they never get enough budget for what they want. But the other side is true, that even when they are given all the tools and utilities and even people that they wanted and requested, that doesn't mean that that turns into effective security. If they're not following guidelines, if they're not learning as they go and understanding what needs to be done at all times, then the security spend could be basically ineffective, regardless of how much money is actually spent on the tools and the people. Okay, so to go along with that, best practice number 2 is optimize your security investment. Okay, and this is very important. This is probably one of the most important slides in the entire deck that I have for you if you take what I'm trying to tell you as a takeaway. Number 1, it's very important to conduct an audit and prioritize your assets based on risk. There's a lot of statements around this. Some people say you can't secure what you can't manage, or you can't manage what you don't even know exists. So you have to first conduct an audit. And the audit should be based on standards, and PECB can definitely help you with some training in that area around what standards should you follow and how would you conduct a proper risk assessment, for example. And how do you prioritize your risk? And what is the most critical risk that needs to be fixed now sooner than later? Some things cannot wait. And so it's very important to move those to the top of the list. Okay? It's very important for your management, your leadership, your executive team, and your board to understand what is, and this is the second bullet on here, what are the events and the items that can cause an interruption to your business, and what is the probability of impact, and what's the consequences for information security. Again, I told you I would never recommend to tell somebody that they could never be breached. If that's what they're asking you to do, those are the kind of engagements that I typically walk away from. I'm just being honest. I'm not in the guarantee business of I can guarantee you will never be breached. But what you can do is you can take measured steps. You can make sure that you understand where your critical assets are and where your really important data lives. An example I will use is if somebody were to break into your company network and get a hold of your personal resume, that may not be the worst thing in the world. But if you were in healthcare, for example, and they got to your patient database, or you were a law firm and they got into your customer database and case database, or you're in retail and they got into the credit cards of your merchants, your consumers, that can be devastating. So you have to prioritize your systems and your data based on the value of what that is to your company. Then what you want to do is you want to figure out the risks. And some of these could be anything from natural disasters to hacking to system downtime. There's a lot of different risks that could occur, even insider theft. Yes, I'm sorry to report there are some companies where people will try to steal data from inside the company. Sometimes they actually get a job at a company just so they can steal the data of that company. It does happen. So you have lots of threats that could affect your company and the data that you are entrusted with. You want to identify and prioritize and rank what needs to be fixed first based on what we can fix. You want to designate the highest level of protection to your most critical assets. You want to make sure that you're doing vulnerability testing. Now this could be in a number of ways. There's technical vulnerability assessment, which means using some sort of a tool usually to check for known vulnerabilities like missing patches and missing configurations and things like that. The other part of vulnerability assessment could be, look, can I get into your organization by walking in with a telecom vendor's badge, but I'm not really from that company? You know, do I have a scheduled appointment? So there's a lot of, vulnerability type assessment that could be done to find out what are the threats to our data. Now, what you want to do is you want to make sure that once you identify what the risks are, then you put together a plan as best as possible with whatever budget you are allowed to utilize or ask for to go after fixing these things to the best of your ability and reducing that risk to a level that is okay by your company. A risk level that is approved, that it's okay to run at that risk level. Again, you have to be honest with your executive team and your board, and you have to be able to tell them, we have reduced the risk to everything possible. There may be some things that are still left that we simply cannot or should not fix because either it'll cost us too much money or it'll have too much of an impact to our business and we wouldn't be able to operate in that manner. And what you want to do is you want to sort of transfer that risk decision, that risk mitigation strategy up to your executive team and to your board and make sure they're okay with what is being left on the table, not fixed. All right, so best practice number 3 here, you got to start with the basics, right? You want to think of this as layers of protection. A lot of cybersecurity controls are about layers upon layers, and you're going to see a couple of slides here where we layer on top of each other. What I believe is there are some very basics that every company should have. Again, if you are connected to the internet, which nowadays who is not, this doesn't matter whether you're in a home office or a remote office or a corporate office, small, medium, large, it doesn't matter. There are some basics that you should have in place. I cannot tell you how many times I've done audits for customers and they don't have the basics in place. And that is, again, what is really wrong with our industry and with our field of cybersecurity is that the basics are not handled. So how can we get to the really advanced topics like artificial intelligence and machine learning and these kind of things when we don't have the basics in place? So I truly believe that we've got to get these basics in place. Some of the basics that you see here are things like a firewall and authentication. That goes back to your ID and your password. And antivirus and patch management, which is one that I'll just take a moment and talk about. I've seen a lot of firms and we talk about, well, what does that mean, patch management? You know, maybe they have a Windows machine and they turn on Windows Update and they think they're okay. And I say, well, that might be all right as a first step, but what about all the third-party programs like Adobe and Java and these kind of things that constantly need updating, sometimes more than Microsoft updates? And the problem is that most consumers and small businesses don't think about all the programs on their computer that need to be updated. So I truly believe that having a corporate mandated and implemented patch management solution, just like you would antivirus, just like you would firewall, is extremely important, and these are some of the basics that have to be in place. Now you'll also see to the left a small box that says pay attention. This is also extremely important. This goes to securing the human. You have to pay attention. You've got to be careful about those emails where there's a link that you click on, but you don't know why you got that email. You don't know why your bank is sending you, or a bank, I'm sorry, let me rephrase. You don't know why a particular bank is sending you an email to log into your account when you don't do banking at that organization. You don't know why you're being asked to log into your PayPal when maybe you don't have a PayPal account. These are early indicators of things that could really go wrong if you did not pay attention. As we move on and we talk about layering on more advanced security, okay, hopefully you can understand why I talked about the basics, because some of the things at the top in green are more advanced. And without the things at the bottom of the page on this slide, it's very difficult to layer on advanced when you haven't even done the basics. So there's some advanced things like file integrity monitoring and vulnerability assessments, centralized log management, compliance mandates, and the ability to actually handle these compliance mandates. There's standards like ISO 27001 that are very important. Now, none of these are super difficult to abide by if you get the basics in place. Again, the organizations that I have had experience with that have the most trouble with a regulatory mandate are ones that don't have the basics in place. They're not doing the daily updating of their systems or the review on a periodic basis of reports from their systems. They'll simply say, I don't have time. Well, you may not have time to spend looking at what is happening with your data and your systems, but the hackers have lots of time. So at what cost can you sit back in your chair if you're a cybersecurity professional of any kind and say, I didn't do that because, well, we just don't have the time. We have more important things to do. A breach becomes extremely important the minute it happens. And so you want to get in front of that. You want to make sure that you're not having to respond to a breach when you could have just spent a little bit of time paying attention to your systems. All right, again, I still want to reiterate there's no such thing as perfect prevention. I truly believe that. We've talked about a lot of steps already that can be taken, and obviously there's a lot more details behind everything that I have mentioned so far, but a lot of it is not difficult. It just needs to be thought about. It needs to be planned. I have a saying where I say you have to do it on purpose. You have to do what you're doing on purpose. You make a conscious choice to ignore system alerts or even looking at systems. You also can make a conscious effort to look at systems and pay attention. I would like to show you here that here's some statistics. Again, this comes from the Verizon report from 2016. 82% of attackers were able to complete a compromise within minutes. There are some studies out there and some tests, and I've been involved in some of these, where you could take a computer and put it on the internet without antivirus and find out how quickly it's going to be compromised, or without a firewall. And it truly is minutes. It may not be a hacker sitting there behind a chair, but it could be scripts that are constantly running, looking for new systems being added to the internet world with certain ports that are open, certain security precautions not in place. So it's no surprise that there's a figure out here published by Verizon that says 82% of the attackers were able to compromise systems within minutes. I totally believe that because there are still too many companies out there that have not checked their websites for vulnerabilities, for example. They haven't had their firewall audited or handed over to a managed firewall provider to be done right. So it's no surprise that compromises can happen so quickly. It's unfortunate, it's just not a surprise. 67% of attackers spent days retrieving assets, and 25% of the organizations who suffered an incident were able to discover it within days. Well, that's interesting, right? So what does that mean about the other 75%? I believe the same type of statistic out of the same report says that the average hacker is inside an organization for more than 200, sometimes 300 days before they're even detected. What I would tell you that I think is more accurate is that the attacker has probably already been in and left, and 300 or 200 days has gone by before the evidence of that intrusion has now been detected. It doesn't mean that they're actively in, that they're still siphoning data from your servers. It means that maybe finally some new piece of technology was implemented, or somebody was hired, or somebody got a hold of a log file, or something else happened which made somebody actually pay attention, and they found that the hacker had actually been inside the organization for 200 or 300 days. I think it's important to make a differentiation there between, is an attacker still there and connected? Are we going to play a cat and mouse game on the firewall to try to disconnect a hacker who's connected live to your organization and kick them out? Or are we finding their footprints and evidence that they had been here weeks, months, let's hope not years ago, and they siphoned off data? So there's a definite struggle here between the detection, or we could call it the detection deficit disorder. How easy or difficult is it to detect somebody inside your organization rumbling around like a pinball inside a pinball machine, getting access to your data and moving freely and leaving with your data, and you didn't even know until it's way too late. Again, I think although I don't want to scare anybody by saying this cannot be prevented, that's not at all what I'm trying to say. There are many steps that can be done. There's ways to set up your network to put systems in the right zones and sort of really keep the most sensitive data away from prying eyes the best you can. All right, best practice number 5, detection. Okay, detection is really an art, if you will, and sometimes a science, but more often it's an art. There's a lot of activity, and having done network forensics and computer forensics for many, many years and responded to a lot of breaches that have happened when it's too late, I can tell you that you really have to have somebody that knows what they're looking at if you really want to find the vector of compromise. So there's certain things you'll hear about: command and control activity, suspicious network traffic, file access, unauthorized use of valid credentials. These are just a couple of items that are big indicators, red flags for me. If I see these in a log or in a system, it tells me, okay, I've got to look further. There might be something there. But how do you actually find those things? Well, it takes experience and training. It takes the right tools. You have to have the right tools. Those of you that have seen me present at other venues, I do a talk about the right tool on the tool belt. And I totally believe that. If you're going to put an addition on your house, you have to have the right tools on your tool belt. You have to hire the right people. Well, the same thing goes in the cybersecurity world. You cannot expect to look at these compromised areas without the right tools in place in order to do so. So you have to have the right tools. All right, let's talk about some of the hurdles, and we talked about a little bit of this before, but this will lead into some of what I'm going to talk about in later slides. 64% of the companies surveyed said they lack the time to manage all their security activities. I'm going to stop right there. Well, actually, let me go to the next one. 49% say they have an IT security staff shortage. These two have been a very, very big trend lately over the last year or two at least, that companies saying they don't have time to manage all the security activities. There's too much going on. There's too many things to watch, and they don't have enough people. They can't even hire enough people. If they wanted to, even if they had the budget, it's hard to find the right talent. My response to this when I'm asked by companies and boards is I say to them, then why are you trying? And I do that somewhat to be humorous, but I also, what I'm trying to say is why are you trying to do it on your own? Where do you think it's going to get to where you're going to be able to do all that on your own? Why don't you look at outsourcing? I know sometimes people don't like that word, so sometimes we'll use the word co-sourcing. What I mean is find yourself a trusted business partner that can help you and figure this out. You don't have to go at it alone. There are people out there, there are specialists that actually specialize in exactly what we've been talking about this entire presentation. Our two companies are examples of that. We do this for a living. We do it all day long. We do the stuff that other people either don't want to do, don't have the time to do, or don't have the skill to do, or the budget, or all the above. Okay. Now there's another percentage here. 23% of companies estimate that they have a high return on investment with their current SIM, the Security Information Event Management, the SIM tool. So SIM is a product that has been basically built by many companies, including one of ours, to gather all the logs from all the different systems on your network, your firewall, your wireless, your switches, your routers, your PCs, your servers. I could go on. And you have to get all these logs. You have to get them into one place. You have to sort through all the noise to find that needle in a haystack that could hurt you. That compromise that might be hiding in all the noise. And that's what SIM technology does very well. But the problem is SIM technology traditionally over the years has been very difficult and expensive, difficult to implement and maintain. If you're a medium to large size company, SIMs can cost you $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 and way up into the many hundreds of thousands depending on how many systems you have to cover. They don't run themselves by no means. Usually a vendor will come in, they will implement one, they'll work with you for a couple weeks to a couple months, and then they'll leave and they'll hand you the keys to your brand new shiny SIM system. The problem is people have a hard time running them post-implementation. So it's very important to see this statistic come out that 23% of people think that they actually have a good return on investment with the SIM that they have purchased. We offer a managed SIM, and we allow the SIM to be able to get even down into the small and medium-sized organizations in addition to the large. So even the smallest company could still have the benefit of a SIM, and it's managed. You don't have to hire that team of 8 or 9 and build yourself a security operations center just to run a SIM. All right, this is exactly what I was talking about in the last slide, co-sourcing, if you want to call this outsourcing, but I think the more appropriate term is co-sourcing. What we mean by this is, the idea of co-sourcing is this: find yourself a vendor that can handle the heavy lifting for you and do the day-to-day monitoring and so on and so forth. But that doesn't mean you as a customer have to lose control. You are going to turn the keys over to a vendor for a certain amount of this stuff that you either cannot do, should not do, or don't want to do. But it doesn't mean that you have to lose your control to your environment. And so there's a lot of reasons to do that. In the sake of time, I'm going to move to the next couple of slides, and I do want to leave some time at the end for some questions. So let me move to the next slides. This is sort of an overview slide of what we believe is complete managed security, sort of cradle to grave, firewall to endpoint, and what's involved in that. You can see there's a lot of things here. There's a lot of items here. This takes a lot of effort and a lot of planning. It's best if you find a vendor like Neturian and Event Tracker that can help you and actually do a lot of this for you and allow you to get back to the business that you are in. If you're in healthcare, you want to treat patients. If you're a law firm, you want to work on cases. If you're in retail, you want to continue serving your customers. You don't want to have to be bothered with a lot of what is up here on this slide. and that is what we offer as a service. We have a concept called Brand Guard. We truly believe that a lot of security breaches that are in the news today, while they do damage down at an individual location level, what they really do is affect the brand. This could be the healthcare entity at the highest level. This could be a retail brand. If you're a franchise or that kind of operation, you may have a lot of field offices or field sites and franchisees. And what typically happens when a breach occurs is nobody understands that that could be John Chrisley's restaurant in a certain state that was breached. What they'll hear is the high-level brand. And so we have a Brand Guard program that we'd love to talk to you more about if you're interested. My contact information will be at the end of the deck. And we can help you to protect your brand. All right, just one slide on our co-managed SIM platform. We actually have named it Symphonic. And this is a full range of services. It's ideal for smaller InfoSec teams or people that don't have a security team at all. And it allows you to simplify and reduce the time to implement, administer, and scale the SIM. Remember we talked about there's only 20-some% of people that actually think they're getting out of their purchased SIM what they expected when they put all their money into it. Why is that? Why is it that SIM is sitting on the shelf these days and not really being used, and people are wondering why did we invest in that SIM tool to begin with? Well, it needs to be managed. It needs to be cared and fed and babysat and watched and monitored, and always continually tuned to the evolving threats that are going on in the world today. It's very hard to do that on your own. So the co-managed SIM that we offer, you can see here that we have this concept of prevent, detect, respond, and predict. Prevent, because our solution actually does a lot of the vulnerability scanning as part of the solution, allows you to figure out how to harden and fix some of the issues that may be found. We have honeypot services, which is we can actually put systems in your network virtually that appear like they're real computers, real servers, real web servers and database servers and email servers to watch and see who is attacking them. Is it an external hacker? Is it the IT person that is breaking into a system because either they're curious or they're trying to steal data? And if you didn't have a system sitting there watching, you wouldn't even know what was going on. And also, we are releasing a pen test as a service. A lot of companies, they're required by regulation to have penetration testing done. There is a difference, and a big difference, between a vulnerability assessment and a penetration test. And if you don't know the difference, please get in contact with me. We can help you and walk through some of that. But our penetration testing service will allow you to see not only where the vulnerabilities are in your environment, but what does it matter? Who cares if there's vulnerabilities? Well, when I show you that I was able to get to your HR database and look up, somebody's salary and get their social security number, or get into the the patient database and get to medical records, when I can actually prove to you that I was able to break in and get to some very sensitive data, that's where a penetration test is really worth the money you'll spend on it. Detect, so we have 24/7 coverage available if it's needed. We actually have people that will watch these systems on a 24/7 basis. The question I have is, can you do that? A lot of people go into it. I'm guilty of this in my past life, where I've hired an entire SOC team, I've built a SOC, I've put systems in place, and I still find it hard with a dedicated team to keep up with 24/7, 365. When something happens, this is where respond comes into place. When something happens, do you know how to respond to it? So we offer the ability to offer some forensic guidance and advisory with telling you some remediation recommendations on how to fix things, and then predict. So we have a very deep threat intelligence database and feeds coming into us where we are constantly being updated on what's going on in the world globally. If you don't have your finger on that global pulse, you just shouldn't be trying to do what it is we do. And so we're able to tell what's going on, and our analysts are very, very highly trained and specialized. And so this is what they do all day long. Again, if we were doctors, we'd be treating patients, but we're not. We are cybersecurity professionals. This is what we do. We eat, breathe, and sleep cybersecurity. and we're always trying to keep one step ahead of the hackers. Okay, I'm going to turn it over back now to Kushtrim to talk a little bit about some of the courses at PECB.
Well, thank you, John, for this outstanding and really informative presentation. And we are really pleased to have you as a presenter in our webinar campaign. Before we proceed with question and answer session, I would like to inform all the attendees that PECB IT Security Portfolio provides training and certification services for ISO 2732, Lead Cybersecurity Manager, Lead Pen Testing Professional, ISO 2734 Application Security, Lead Implementer and Lead Auditor, ISO 2735 Information Security Incident Management Lead, Computer Forensics Examiner, Foundation, and Lead Examiner. These training courses will provide you with comprehensive theoretical instructions and hands-on training in the most innovative and advanced training environment. These training courses will help you to learn the required skills and knowledge to establish an effective security program. A PECB certificate will demonstrate your dedication in implementing and managing these processes and frameworks. And most importantly, you will receive a global worldwide recognition. For more information, please visit our website www.pecb.com/training. Now we are going to proceed with a question and answer session. The first question is, what are the best practices to implement patch management?
Okay, very good question. So on the topic of, and before I get into these, I just want to make sure you can see on the slide that's on the screen a lot of contact information for myself. I'm very active on LinkedIn and Twitter, so please connect with me if you like. Follow me on Twitter, follow our companies on Twitter, and my email is there. So if you have any questions that I do not answer here, or you'd like to talk to me more about our services or an engagement, please reach out to me and do so. Going back to the question, so when it comes to patch management, again, we talked briefly on the webinar about, you know, when I talk patch management to customers, they immediately think, well, we have Windows updates turned on, or we have automatic updates turned on, and so we should be good. It really depends on the size of your organization and what you can afford. I mean, it really does come down to money sometimes. I would say that there's a lot of cloud-based offerings now to customers where they don't have to have servers anymore on site managing the patches. This could be something that a managed service provider, a managed security provider could stand up for you. And what typically happens is you install a piece of software on your computer that will, one, it will audit to find out what are the missing patches. And then two, it'll allow an administrator or the vendor to schedule and roll out the patches that have either been approved or, you know, and so on and so forth. Now this could be anything from a patch regarding your monitor driver to, you know, the Adobe products, to Java, to Microsoft. It could be all the above. What I recommend highly is that if you don't have a good patch management solution in place, that you seek one out or find a vendor that will do this. And if you contact me, we do have some partners that offer this as a service, and so I'm very familiar with how this works. And what I also recommend is allow these vendors to do what it is they do. If you get into worrying about which patch is going to break which, you're never going to get to where you need to be. Sometimes it's good when a patch breaks a system. I know you don't want to cripple your business, but it's very important, again, to get critical security patches applied and not wait. I've seen companies that want to take 6 months or more to apply a patch because they're worried about what it's going to do. And it's simply unacceptable in my personal opinion. You have to be a little more on top of it than that. If that requires that you set up some testing systems or a lab to test patches maybe every month as they come out, then that's exactly what's required. But you've got to be proactive. And again, if anyone needs any assistance on finding a good patch management solution for either use within their company or a vendor that would help take some of the heavy lifting off of that, I'm happy to recommend.
Thank you, John, for this great answer. Now we are moving to the second question. How can I get a management to be committed to our cybersecurity implementation? Resources and budget are grudgingly given, but afterwards it is very difficult to get the management to meet and review the management system?
So very good question and a very interesting topic. You know, how do you get management to understand sort of the plight or the circumstance of the cybersecurity, you know, personnel? Again, that's almost an art, not a science. I have a long career as a CISO, and I have had to hone my skill in communicating that message over many, many years. There will be certain companies that are more receptive to this than others. I have worked for some leaders in my career that were very supportive of the security mission because they got it, they understood, and they wanted to protect the organization. And then there are others where they don't want to hear it, they don't want to give you the support, they don't want to give you the budget, they don't want to hear it. What I recommend is trying to find some allies within the organization. I've worked in some very large organizations that can be very political, if you will. I'm sure all of you understand what I'm saying. When I say political, it can be very interesting to figure out, you know, how to maneuver and how to get what you need when needed and get the support you need. What I recommend is, in those cases, try to find an ally. Maybe there's somebody in internal audit or risk management or legal or even within HR. But you've got to find allies that will help share your mission and your enthusiasm and your concern, because at the end of the day, most cybersecurity professionals are in this to protect their company and their organization and the data. Now, there are some cybersecurity professionals that I have known in my career that are just in this to see how many tools they can get and how big they can make their empire. And that hurts the profession as a whole, and you know, those people usually don't get a lot of support. I think also you have to make sure that you figure out how your leadership wants to be communicated to. Some people, quite honestly, they don't want to see the details. They want to understand at a high level. What does this mean? You know, so what? I have 100 servers with critical risks that go back 90 days. So what? Well, maybe that's the wrong way to approach that conversation with them. Okay? There's many tactics and many ways, and I'd be happy to talk, you know, offline with anyone and even talk about some advisory services around that. But it's very, you have to understand who you're talking to and how they want to be communicated. And sometimes you just have to sit down with management and ask them, how would you like me to show you risk? Is it a chart, you know, and some nice pretty dials on a chart? Or do you want specifics? It really depends on their level of technical knowledge and interest, and can they consume the information that you are saying. In my career, and I'm always learning myself. In my career, I found there's certain people that I just could not talk to. Maybe we just didn't see eye to eye, so I had to find other people to do it for me. Sometimes it was a CTO or the CIO. In some cases, it is the CEO. And you need people on your side to help further that mission and that cause.
Thank you again, John, for this great question. We are moving to the third question. What are the best practices for user management?
Okay. User management, as we talked about, user IDs and passwords, right, is one of the weakest areas right now still within cybersecurity. I'm a big believer in multi-factor authentication and smart cards. I've worked in healthcare for a lot of years, so biometrics becomes a very tricky subject within healthcare when you're talking about fingerprints and retinal scan. While it sounds cool, is not widely accepted. People don't like something scanning their eye, even if it's not going to cause damage. But what I find is in a lot of organizations, they are carrying around ID badges on their belt or on their shirt, and a lot of times these cards are used for door access, and so many organizations have these. Then they sit down, and it's almost like physical security is not talking to information security, and they're trying to figure out what's a better way than passwords to authenticate our users into our computers and systems. And the answer usually is sitting right there on that ID card. They could implement that and use the same card. And so they could, and it does take some technology. There's a lot of computers nowadays where you can buy the computers with a smart card reader in them or a prox reader built into them. And it may cost a little bit more when you buy your computers. But the point is, again, if you plan for this and you do it right and you put it into your annual budgeting, If it gets approved, you can start moving down that road. My real recommendation is to, at all costs, get away from passwords. Try not to use passwords as your main, and I know we all do it, right? All of our systems everywhere are based on passwords, but the problem is if you cannot enforce a really strong password policy and have it where it's changing every 90 or 120 days, because a lot of organizations just will not accept that. But that is the right thing to do when it comes to password security. Any auditor will tell you that. So if you cannot get there from here, then I recommend putting in some sort of multi-factor authentication like a smart card of some kind, which should make it even easier on your users, where maybe they can only use that card and a 4-digit PIN like when they go to the ATM, or maybe they use that card and a fingerprint on the computer device or on a connected device. You got to take steps to get away from passwords. The other part I would say is you want to sort of centralize your user credentials. There's a lot of organizations that utilize Active Directory, and now with many cloud systems they use directory as a service in the cloud or federated directories. But I think it's important that you don't have too many directories that are not connected and synced. You don't want to have too many credential stores laying around an organization. You know, to get into these systems you use this ID and password. To get into these other systems you use yet another. You really should try to centralize your credentials as much as possible for ease of management.
Thank you, John. Once again, we are moving to some more questions, and the others, Mr. John, will answer through email. The fourth question is, what are the first things that you should verify in case on ransomware attack?
Okay, ransomware is a great topic, and we do a lot of protections against ransomware. We actually, with our solutions, we've caught ransomware that has been hiding on a system before it had a chance to fire and lock the system and ask for the ransom to give the people the ability to, you know, get in front of that issue before it is too late. I think at a high level, and just in the sake of time for this webinar, I always recommend that people have a really good backup of their data and have that backup safe and secure. You know, if you were to do a backup of data, you want to make sure that backup is not on the same system that might be affected. So again, there are solutions out there. I have partners I can recommend where they'll not only do a data backup of your system, but they'll do a full image backup of your computer. There's always the chance that the ransomware could sneak its way into that backup, but the point is that if you do backups of a clean system and then you do regular backups, if you ever got hit with ransomware, what we'd like to believe is that if you do your backups right, if you got ransomware that popped up on your computer because it was not detected, you could essentially say, so what? Maybe you don't have to pay that ransom. You move on, you re-image your system, you have IT give you a new image or even a new computer, but your data is safe and sound somewhere else. Maybe it's in the cloud, maybe it's on an external hard drive, nice and encrypted and off to the side somewhere, put into a safe, who knows. But the idea is you have to plan for ransomware. It's a reality of our world nowadays. It's not going away. And I will tell you, though, that we've had a lot of success with our solutions in place detecting the ransomware before it's had a chance to do great damage to the end user. So please contact me for more info on that if you'd like to have those same protections.
Thank you, John. Once again, we are moving to the last question for this webinar, and the other question will be answered from Mr. Chrisley through email. The next question is, can you provide some more information on the slide 6, co-sourcing? What is the best practice really?
Okay, yeah, and I'll try to do this as brief as I can for the webinar. Co-sourcing. So again, what I mean by co-sourcing is, instead of saying the word outsourcing, right? Outsourcing can be a very sensitive word for both companies and employees alike. They get very nervous when they hear you're going to outsource a part of your business to somebody else, to a vendor. They may be worried about, well, wait, what am I going to do after that? And quite honestly, sometimes the answer is, well, you're going to keep doing what you're doing now, but we're going to have this vendor take over the heavy lifting or the management of this new system. Maybe you've never had a SIM. Maybe you've never had a firewall. or maybe you just don't want to manage your firewall day to day. Co-sourcing means, in reality, that we're going to do that for you, but you're still going to have control. You're going to have access. You're going to be making, the business decisions on what happens, but we're going to do the monitoring and the heavy lifting for you. So co-sourcing is really, in layman's terms, the best way I can explain it to you. Find yourself a vendor like us that you can partner with and that will not completely take over and cut you out of the equation, so you can still be responsible for how the firewall is configured. Now I will tell you, we actually have a best practice implementation of our firewall. We do things a certain way to keep our customers safe, but at the end of the day, if the customer needs to have some things opened up to do business, we will allow it. Some vendors will not. So when it comes to the SIM, you'd have access to the reports and the alerts and be able to take actions, and so would we. Now, we work with customers because we figure some people want us to take complete control, and others don't want us to have any control at all. And we actually sell our software so that you as a customer or you as a business, maybe you are an MSP yourself, and you want to offer this to your customers. And so you can do that as well. But co-sourcing is really just about finding that nice balance of partnership with your vendor. In any business, you're going to have vendors that are your partners, and you want to make sure that it's a very good relationship. And so that's what I mean by co-sourcing.
Once again, I would like to thank you, John, for this attractive and really informative presentation. Also, I would like to thank all the attendees who have joined us today, and we hope you have enjoyed this webinar. In the upcoming days, we will send you the recorded link, which will be uploaded on our official YouTube channel and in our website, PECB.com. Goodbye, everyone, and I wish you all a pleasant day ahead. Thank you once again.